Hi guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, we'll tackle about the game between Vincent Keymer versus Magnus Carlsen on the FIDE World Cup 2023. So here, Vincent Keymer plays white pieces while Magnus Carlsen here is the black pieces. So Vincent Keymer started the moves of d4 and after knight f6 of Magnus Carlsen. Again, the white respond with c4 and after e6, knight c3 and d4. So we will now go into the opening of Queen's Gambit decline, in which after d5 the white here plays c6 d5 and after e6 d5 and bishop to g5. We will enter now to the Queen's Gambit decline with the exchange variation. So here after bishop to b4 of Magnus Carlsen here, Magnus Carlsen here can also try another fifth move with c6, defending his d5. So that, for example, after e3, here comes now the bishop to d6 without worrying for his d5 because his knight is actually pinned. So after d6, although it was actually covered, but there is c6. So after, for example, bishop to d3 for white, and after kingside castling, knight g to e2, rook to a8 controlling the e file, and after queen to c2, and again there is just simple h6. The idea, for example, after bishop to h4, knight b to d7, and kingside castling, there is actually a sacrifice on the king side. For example, after bishop takes h2, and after, for example, the white here grab that bishop, there is simple knight check, and after the king retreats to g1, and again the black here can now start a deadly assault on the king side after queen takes h4. Because after rook f to d1, if the white here tries to have some lob square, for example, on these squares on f1, e1, and d2, but it is too late because there is queen takes f2 check, and after king h1, queen h4 check, king to g1, queen h2 check, and after king to f1, there is simple knight takes e3 check, and an attack to the white's queen on the c2. Although, for example, after here bishop to g5 for Vincent Keymer, Magnus Carlsen here tries another aggressive move for black, which is bishop to b4, pinning down this knight on c3, for example, while this bishop of white also pinning the knight on f6 of black. So here Vincent Keymer just opens some diagonal for his bishop on this position and tries to develop his pieces, and so that he can castle on the king side later on, and later on unpin this threat of the black pieces on the b5. So after h6, attacking the bishop of Vincent Keymer, just retreat to bishop to f4, and after a developing move of Magnus Carlsen, Vincent Keymer here wants some bishop trade after bishop to d3, and Magnus Carlsen here grab that bishop, and after queen takes d3, c6 defending his d5, and again Vincent Keymer here goes with his plan after knight to e2 because later on the white here can castle on the king side while unpinning from the bishop on b4. So after, for example, knight to h5 here, attacking the bishop of Vincent Keymer, but Vincent Keymer here simply plays bishop to e5, and after knight e7, Vincent Keymer here simply plays h3. Maybe his idea here, for example, if Magnus Carlsen here grab that bishop, but there's the simple d6 to e5. So for example, the black here should play g6 because if, for example, playing a random move, then there is g4, then this knight is actually impressed on to the h5. So after g6, a forced move for black, but although the white here can simply castle, and after kingside castling for black, there is just simple f4, and after queen to 7, connecting the black rooks here, and again completing his development on the opening, but there's simple e4. The idea is, for example, d takes e4, knight takes e4, rook to d8, attacking the queen, and queen to c4. Although the white here has no bishop, but we shall see in this position now that the pieces of the white here is actually a mere active rather than the black, because the black knight here is actually on a rim. so it is actually dim, and for example this bishop is actually overstretched on the black's camp. So going back, for example, after h3, a simple h3 for Vincent Keymer here, Magnus Carlsen didn't grab that knight, but instead plays knight h f6, retreating his knight to f6 so that he can actually now control the center. And later on, he can castle. So Vincent Keymer now, he retreat his bishop, saving his bishop to h2 square, and after king said castling here, a3, attacking the bishop of Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen retreat to a5. And after, for example, king said castling, rook to a8, controlling the e file, rook a to c1 with a threat to an attack to the c file. For example, after queen to e7, b4, attacking the bishop of Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen retreat his bishop to d8 because there is no actually good square for this bishop. He cannot go there because there is a bishop for Vincent Keymer, and still the bishop b7 here is actually still the same because there is knight to a4. So the bishop d8 here seems reasonable for the retreat of Magnus Carlsen bishop. So after knight g3, putting his knight on a square that can actually control the center, and with a counter attack on the king side, for example knight f5, attacking the queen. So Magnus Carlsen here move his bishop to c7, so that, for example, if this bishop will be moved and be out on its diagonal, then Magnus Carlsen here can solve his bishop problem that is actually passive on the d8. So Vincent Keymer here accept that challenge and plays knight f5, attacking the queen, and Magnus Carlsen here solve his passive bishop by trading it against the white's bishop, and after king takes h2, queen to e6, saving his queen and attacking also this knight, although it was actually defended, but queen e6 is a reasonable square for his queen. And Vincent Keymer here retreat to g3, and after queen to d6, pinning down this knight so that this knight will be stopped to be more active on the board. So Vincent Keymer unpinned that queen, and after a5, trying to expand on the queen side, but Vincent Keymer here simply retreat his queen to b1, defending his pawns on the queen side. So Magnus Carlsen here tries to be more active. For example, he played knight b6 on this position, and after b takes a5, here comes now the knight c to e4, trying to win back now the pawns. And we shall see in this position now that although this is actually undefended, but if Vincent Keymer here grab that pawn, but there is a simple rook e to b8, then this queen is actually been trapped by the black's pieces on this position. So going back, for example, after knight c4, in which Vincent Keymer here just played queen to b4, and after rook takes to a5, regaining back his pawn to p7, but there's just simple knight takes to d5. For example, if Magnus Carlsen here tries this move, actually winning back his pawn, but actually he loses a defense for his queen, and the white here can simply grab the queen now. So rook takes a5 is a reasonable move for the black, and although the black here regain his pawn, but the white here has a nice tricky move after knight takes to d5, because after knight takes to d5, the black here should not play rook takes to d5, because there is a simple rook takes to c4, and after queen takes b4, rook takes b4, rook d7, defending his pawn, and after, for example, rook to b1 on this position, trying to have two attackers on that pawn with only one defender, b5, rook to c1, attacking the c6, knight to d5, attacking the rook, but there's the simple rook to b3, and after rook to e6, defending his c6, rook c5, rook a7, knight to e2, g5, and after knight c3, trying to have some exchanges for the knight, and again pressurizing these pieces black. But there's the simple knight takes to c3, but it allows here for white to take the knight with a pressure to this pawn. And after rook a6, although for example in this position after king to h2, still the white here is a pawn up, and the black here will simply have some smooth kingside expansion on this position. So going back for example after knight takes to d5, in which Magnus Carlsen here reply with knight takes to d5. So after queen takes c4, rook takes a3, queen to c5, queen takes to c5, rook takes, rook to a8, knight f5, h5, g4 for Vincent Keymer, h takes to g4, h takes to g4, rook a2 to Magnus Carlsen, but again, Vincent Keymer here simply attack now the independent pawn on b7. So after rook to a1, trying to have some rook trade on this position, but after rook takes with a check, king moves, king f8, g5, and after the move knight c7, in which Magnus Carlsen here actually committed an accurate move, in which on this position Magnus Carlsen here should play knight to e7. The idea here, for example, if Vincent Keymer plays knight to d6, we shall see in this position now that this knight actually defended the f5, and there is no rook to f5 in this position, pressurizing this pawn with the knight also, and black here can simply place b6 attacking the rook. And after for example rook c2, rook to a5 attacking the pawn, f4 defending, but there is just simple f6, and after king f3, pawn takes, knight c4 attacking the rook, rook moves, and after f takes g5, we shall see in this position now that the material here is actually equal. So going back for example after g5, in which on the 36 moves Magnus Carlsen here commit an inaccurate move with knight to c7, because it allows here for Vincent Keymer to penetrate the position with knight to d6. The idea here is that there is an attack on the b7 pawn and f7, following up with rook to f5. So after g6 on this position, defending the f5 against the threat, for example, of this rook with a battery on attack on the f7, but there is just simple knight takes to b7, and after rook to b1, although for example the black here can try another move with knight to e6, but after rook takes, and again after knight takes to g5, knight c5, still the white here has an extra pawn. So going back on this position after Magnus Carlsen here just move his rook to b1 attacking this knight, but Vincent Keymer here plays knight to d8 trying to win now the pawn on b6, and after rook b5, and Vincent Keymer here grab now the rook on b5, although on this position after rook to b5, the white here can try rook takes c6, but although there is rook takes g5 check, and after king f3 and knight b5, knight moves, king e7, and knight to c5, still the white here is a pawn up. So going back on the game after rook to b5, the white here grab now the rook, and after c takes b5, knight c6, stopping this pawn to advance on the b4, and Magnus Carlsen here places king to e8, trying to activate his king so that he can actually support this pawn from promoting this to a queen on the b file, the only hope that he can do, because he is actually now a pawn down. So after knight to b4, stopping any further advance, king e7, f4, king b6, king f3, again we shall see in this position now that the black here can no longer make some forward moves on this position. So after knight to e6, king to e2, knight g7, e4, starting to march the white's pawn, and after knight h5 attacking the f4, but king to f3 for Vincent Keymer, just defending, and after knight g7 for Magnus Carlsen, knight d3. So we shall see in this position now that the idea of knight to d3, a retreat move, is that the duty of the king here is to stop this pawn to promote on the b file, while this knight will go jump to e5 and try to pick this pawn, because we shall see in this position it is actually undefended. So after knight h5, Magnus Carlsen here can only do a waiting move here, because after king to e3, knight g3, still the white here is a pawn out, and after d5, using the pawn advantage of the white. So after king c7, king d4, trying to penetrate the position, king b6, stopping any advance to c5. But there is again, like I said, there is now the knight to e5, because this knight is actually loose now on the defense from these pawns, a black. So after b4 for Magnus Carlsen, trying now to promote his pawn, but there is the simple knight takes f7, b3. So again, knight to e5. The idea here of knight e5 is, for example, after the black here plays b2, but there is simple knight c5 check and an attack to the pawn, and after king c7, knight takes b2. We shall see in this position now that it is actually a huge material advantage for the white's perspective. So after knight e2, giving a check. So Vincent Keymer here plays king to e3, and Magnus Carlsen here do the tricks after king to b5, because it is the only hope that he can do in this position. For example, if Vincent Keymer here grab that poison knight after the king takes e2, because there's simple b2, and this pawn is actually unstoppable. Even though, for example, after d6, there is b1 equal to queen, and after d7, but queen takes e4, check, king d1, and queen to d5. Again, the queen here stop any further promotion for the white's perspective. So after king to b3, the only hope for Magnus Carlsen to win by trying to sacrifice a poison pawn on e2, but Vincent Keymer here didn't accept that poison, but plays an accurate move with knight to d3, stopping any further advance of this pawn with the knight on this position. So Magnus Carlsen here plays knight c3, but after d6, queen c6, and e5. On the 50th move, Magnus Carlsen here actually resigned, because this pawn is actually unstoppable from promoting to a queen, while this king and knight is actually can easily grab now this undefended pawn on p6. So going back, for example, on the opening after d4, knight f6, c4, a6, knight c3, and after d5, the queen's gambit, in which their opening battlefield goes for a queen's gambit decline with the exchange variation. Although on his position after bishop to b4, Magnus Carlsen here actually can try a solid c6, but bishop b4 is actually a quite fine on this position, because the evaluation of the board is actually a mere equal. Even though, for example, after some couple of moves and they go for on a position after queen to b4, in which it is still unequal after some exchanges, and they go for an endgame on this position after some exchanges. But on this position after 36th move, Magnus Carlsen here do some inaccuracies after playing knight c7 instead of a good move, which is knight to e7. And after knight c7, Magnus Carlsen position here actually collapsed, and Vincent Keymer here easily win on the endgame with an impressive endgame technique on the board. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video and please don't forget to subscribe.